Forge Your Path podcast episode number 2. Just want to say thank you for all the great support, all the messages surrounding episode 1. It's been a lot of fun getting this out there. And also just want to say how much I appreciate those comments. And if you continue to enjoy this podcast, please share with other people, spread the word, because we're just getting started here. So, jumping into episode number 2, I want to tell a little story about how this one came about. So, it's December, Thanksgiving's over, and what comes next? You got it. Holiday Christmas songs are on 106.7 by me in the New York City area, and now everybody's got holidays on the mind. Turkey's done. Everybody's thinking about the next piece, which is, of course, Christmas for those who celebrate. So, hanging out at the house over the weekend, and we're futz around on Netflix, and my daughters run across this movie, which I hadn't heard about. It's called Spirited. So, if you don't know it, it is a remake of A Christmas Carol, which was never my favorite movie. Kind of thought it was dreadful, the original. But this, of course, is a remake. And it's got 2 of my favorite actors, Will Ferrell, Ryan Reynolds. Love these guys. So I thought, hey, let's do it. What I didn't realize was we start the movie and essentially it's a musical. So both of these guys are doing full-on musical numbers with everything that goes with a musical. Yes, full-throated singing and dancing. And we watch the movie. I personally think it's a blast. Really cool take on the film of the original Christmas Carol, where this is now from the point of view of the 3 ghosts. So it's a blast. Family loves it. And I get to Sunday and I think, well, how did these guys go about choosing to do this movie? And I learned a ton. And that's what I wanted to share today about what I learned from the experience of Ryan Reynolds and Will Ferrell. So, what did I take away from this? So, in my mind, for a good portion of my life, I've had this belief that really successful people, highly successful people, they have this unbelievable ability to walk around with a level of invincibility where they don't fear anything. They don't fear change. They don't fear failure. They just are somehow stronger and better and have this ability that perhaps the rest of us don't have. And I think after what I learned is I concluded the opposite. The bigger the stage, the greater the fear. So isn't maybe our journey to figure out how we can conquer and face the fear? If we want to be that better version of ourselves, maybe that's the antidote. How can we figure out how we can face fear consistently in order to bring up our best self? How can we confront fear and instead of shying away from it and having inaction or passivity, how can we show up and become that better version of ourselves? So that's what I want to talk about today. And I learned about 3 fears that both Ryan Reynolds and Will Ferrell face in the choice and execution of doing Spirited. That's what I want to share today. And as you listen, perhaps some of this resonates with you in terms of fears that you are seeing in your own lives. We don't like to talk about it. We don't like to ever admit that we've got it. I think that as we start to confront and observe that fear that we have, maybe we're going to start to unlock those possibilities in our own lives. So let me attack the 3 fears and how these 2 gentlemen were able to navigate it in the course of making this movie. So, fear number one, fear of embarrassment. Fear of embarrassment. So Ryan Reynolds and Will Ferrell had never really done musical theater. Will Ferrell had done sketches, and yes, you'd seen humorous little takes, whether it's that piece in Old School where Will Ferrell is doing some of these side songs or SNL sketches, and it's not really part of who they were. So it's fundamentally different to do it as a comedic side bit as opposed to an authentic piece, doing musical theater, really living that character. So both of them realized pretty quickly that you can't fake it. Ryan Reynolds said, look, in other roles, you can show up and you can figure it out. You become the character, you find your way in. Musical theater, either you have it or you don't. So how do you face that fear? Well, for the both of them, it was simple. Get repetition. Get repetition. What does repetition do? It builds competency. The more you show up and do the thing, you're going to build skills. And naturally, as you build skills and you build that competency, you will build awareness of the fact that you are getting better and therefore improving. So there still are going to be mistakes along the way. Is there a willingness, however, to just show up and do the work, even if you are perhaps aspiring, if you are perhaps not an expert, not perfect, maybe you're really not very good at all, but you're still willing to show up and get the reps. That's what these guys had to do. And they both talked about the embarrassment of the one scene for the song Good Afternoon, which is classic, one of my favorite parts of the film. They have to, for 5 days, it takes them to get this scene right. Imagine this, 100-degree weather, dressed in colonial garb, in Boston Common, 50 people in the scene, and just sweating out of every human orifice you have. And every time they make a minor mistake, restart. Whole thing's got to be done again. So the embarrassment of that, carrying those missteps and knowing that everyone else is now having to do this over again, that's what they had to face. And the only way through it was to show up, get reps, and move past it. So I think for us, the lesson is, can you be willing to show up and get the repetitions in, knowing you may not be excellent from the start? So that's the challenge. That's how you face your way through that first fear. So that's fear number one. Fear number two, fear of expectation. Expectation. In anything that we do, we have this perception of what we're supposed to be, and maybe what other people perceive us to be, based on what? Our past accomplishments, our past successes, maybe even some of our past failures. And so every time we put ourselves on the line and we have to step on stage, step in the arena to perform, there's going to be expectation with it from our own perception. So how do these two guys carry that? Well, for Ryan Reynolds, it was probably even bigger than Will Ferrell in a couple ways. He had been the guy always known as previously the wise guy, the rom-com hero. Then he evolves, becomes the action hero in Deadpool. Then he becomes movie producer, soccer club owner. If you've ever seen Welcome to Wrexham. So now there's this expectation that he has to be this role and be able to ace musical theater. So that's a fear of the expectation of, can he do it? And there's even one more bigger one he had. He placed this burden on himself. can I live up to standing side by side in this comedic genius of Will Ferrell? That's a big one. For Will Ferrell, the expectations were different. When he did Elf, he actually had this fear that he may never do another movie again. It could be so bad and that no one would ever want to watch it. Well, we all know that Elf was a holiday hit. It's been a classic for nearly 20 years. So the legacy of that is what he had to place on the line. So he had this fear of expectation that if I do Spirited and it doesn't live up to the hype, will I tarnish the legacy of that prior film? Will everyone's expectations be diminished? Will I fail to meet their expectations of what I can do in a role? So how did both of these men face their way through it? Well, for Reynolds, he talks about being self-conscious at first, doing repetitions with Will Ferrell and carrying a little bit of that self-awareness and watching himself while he was acting. Anybody that's ever performed at any stage, whether that's theatrical, whether that's an athlete in the sports arena, or a public speaking engagement in business or some other arena, I think that you cannot perform and watch yourself at the same time. If you're evaluating yourself, you are not present in the moment. Just like right now, if I'm sitting here wondering how I'm doing in this particular podcast episode, I'm going to bomb because I'm not present thinking about delivering a message. So as a result, there's this aspect of presence that's required. So at first, there's this self-conscious component, and you have to face that reality and then let it go. That's what Ryan Reynolds did. For Will Ferrell, he had to do the same. He had to step in to do the work and then simply let go of the expectation of whatever was past, because once he made the choice to begin doing the film, the die was cast. It was now time to start a new chapter and let go of whatever had been going on before. So it's an interesting thing to think about with our own expectations and how are they serving us? When you have that expectation of yourself and you start to fear your performance, when you start to fear what may happen, is that really serving you to bring out your best self and to step up and perform? I would argue no. And the best way is to realize that fear, be aware of it, and then consciously take the steps to just show up and be present. And over time, that fear diminishes and you're able to move past it. So that was number 2. Let's talk about the big one. Let's talk about the big one that ultimately, I think all these 3 intersect, but let's call it out. Whenever we step into anything new, or you can even argue when we step at anything we've done before, what is it that ultimately we fear most? It's fear of failure. Past performance does not guarantee future results. How many times have you seen that on a disclaimer somewhere? So there's always this fear that we may not perform in the way that we did in the past. Am I the one-hit wonder? I might think, if I'm a sales professional, I had a great first month. If I'm a rookie in a sports environment and I have a dynamite first year or a first game, can I do it again? Is everyone expecting me to do that again? What if I don't surpass that expectation? So I think that always exists for us, that ultimate fear of failure. So how do we face that? Well, how did these 2 men face that? These are guys getting $20 million a picture. And for them, that fear of failure looms a heck of a lot larger for us who may not have millions or tens of millions of people with their eyes on our product or performance. So how did they face it? Well, was the fear of failure real for them? Yeah, you better believe it. Ryan Reynolds talked about his fear and he described it as high red alert at all times. he was consumed by it to a degree. When he goes and does interviews, he described becoming so nauseous that he can barely show up to get the interview started. He carries that fear as part of who he is. And for Will Ferrell, it's the same thing. He realized that, yes, there is a fear of failure here that would be potentially devastating if he didn't perform and deliver. So how do both men face this? What's our learning from this particular experience that we can take from it? So there's a couple big ones, and I like both of them. For Ryan Reynolds, instead of trying to hide the fear or conceal it or act as though it doesn't exist, he embraces it. He embraces the fear and has chosen as part of his identity to challenge himself as part of his growth process, to show up and to make confronting fear part of who he is. He describes it as an essential element to survive. So that is how he has gone from the wise guy in the rom-com and movies such as Van Wilder that didn't exactly blow up the box office, but were fun watches, to more serious roles, and then him stepping outside the box of expectation to do things like Spirited. So for him, facing fear of failure is part of what he's chosen to do. I think that's just dynamite. How about Will Ferrell? He has a different perspective, which is equally powerful. So what Will Ferrell says is this. Early on in his career, he was at USC, and he was a very talented guy. And he was on the path to become a sports broadcaster. And he did a comedic bit in class one day. Everybody absolutely loved it. So what he concluded was, sure, he can go ahead on this perhaps safer, more established path. However, he's got this other interest. He's got this spark. So he actually said to himself, which is going to be the greater catastrophe? Which is going to be the greater disappointment? Will it be if I try this and fail, if I don't succeed in comedy, or will the greater disappointment be the fear of never having tried? Living a life of regret, where I didn't go all in and I didn't try, and 5, 10, maybe 20 years down the line, I've chosen to suppress my passion, the human instinct to grow, to take risks, and to challenge ourselves. Isn't that going to be the greater disappointment? So yes, the fear of failure is always there, but he realizes the greater loss would be the fear of never having tried. So as a result, he challenged himself to pursue comedy. He found his break in becoming part of a group called the Groundlings. Then he makes his way to Saturday Night Live, and after his first performance, there's a review written. And the critics come in and tab him. One review put him as the most annoying member of the new cast. So what did he do? He put it on the wall, he turned it into a dartboard, he threw darts against it, and he also decided never to look at another critique again. Because obviously, we're really good at being our own worst enemy and planting those doubts and fears and critiques. So rather than choosing to read all the critics say things like this about him, he decided to be driven by his fear of not trying. The fear of, what if I don't do this? So obviously, 25 years later, I think it's safe to say that Will Ferrell made the right choice. So as we're thinking about those risks, those challenges that place us into those new spots where we put ourselves on the line, from as perhaps small as I'm an athlete and I want to try that new position, but I know there's that fear of failure, or I want to take that class knowing that it's not really exactly what my major entails, or it's something different, but I want to try it anyway, even though I may not be good at it. to the person that wants to switch careers and they know they have a passion for doing something else, but it's not necessarily what their skills or training pertains to. And they want to forage out and try something new. They want to put themselves on the line. Can we prioritize that fear of what if I never do it? And if we flip it, how about those rewards? How about the rewards of what if I do this and how incredible might that become? What's the potential of me doing this new thing? What's the opportunity here that might just catalyze me to a whole new area? It might bring me so much more joy, so much more challenge, so much more excitement. Can I focus on that opportunity as opposed to my fear of failure? And put that energy into the things that we want as opposed to what we don't want. So personally, I'm so glad that Ryan Reynolds and Will Ferrell took the plunge. They faced these 3 fears and put out this movie. I think it's a blast. In the last year or so, used to tell people that I'm not much of a musical guy, but after seeing Wicked over Labor Day, which I found to be absolutely inspirational, after watching Spirited, I think I may be rewriting my expectation of whether I'm a musical guy or not, because I found such joy, such comedy, such inspiration in this film, and even more so from learning about these guys behind the scenes and understanding that just like you and me, they've got the same fears. They've just challenged themselves to confront them and move past them in different ways. So thank you everybody for listening. I hope that as you face your next fears today, tomorrow, into next week, that you found some strategies here to give yourself that opportunity to observe that fear that's out there. And rather than thinking you're invincible or not enough to be able to overcome it, just show up with a little bit of courage and do your best, bring your best self to that challenge and make the most of it. So have a great day. Have a great week. We'll be coming back at you soon with episode number 3. Thank you for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed it, please share it on social media. Also, if you're interested in learning more about my coaching programs, please see the show notes for the link to my website. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.